Toddler found a German shepherd trapped in a wall. What happened next shocked the town. The town of Wesley Grove was the kind of place where people still left their doors unlocked and kids played barefoot in the streets until the sun dipped behind the trees. It was quiet, quaint, and full of history, some of it proud, some of it forgotten. Old houses lined the main road like sleepy sentinels, each with their own creaks and secrets. One such house sat just outside of town, inherited by Rachel after her grandmother passed. It was sturdy, with ivy creeping up the brick, and a detached garage that leaned slightly to one side like it was tired of standing. Rachel had moved in with her son Eli, a curious, bright-eyed toddler with soft curls and a way of tilting his head when he was listening. And Eli was always listening. To everything. For the first few days, it was the usual chaos of moving, unpacking boxes, getting the electricity sorted, learning where the floorboards creaked. Rachel was still adjusting to single motherhood and her new full-time role of holding everything together. Eli was adjusting too, though not with tantrums or trouble. Instead, he seemed to gravitate to the side of the garage. Several times a day, Rachel would find him there, standing perfectly still with his little hand on the wall, his ear pressed gently against the peeling gray paint. "Doggy," he whispered one day, not looking at her. "Doggy cry." Rachel blinked. "What baby?" He turned around, eyes wide and serious. "Doggy in the wall. Sad." She laughed softly, kneeling beside him. "There's no doggy in the wall, sweetheart. Maybe you heard a bird or—" But he shook his head, one tiny finger pointing to a hairline crack in the concrete. "Shoo," he said, placing a finger on her lips. "He's sleepy." That night, Rachel lay in bed with her phone, Googling imaginary friends and toddlers and how to tell if your child is just creative or needs therapy. She smiled at the absurdity, but something tugged at her. Eli wasn't the kind of kid who made up things. He noticed real things adults overlooked: the ant trail on the porch, the sound of the wind shifting before a storm, when someone was silently upset. Still, it was probably just an overactive mind mixed with a new environment. A few nights later, Rachel stood by the kitchen window, rinsing a mug, when she heard it. A sound. Faint. A kind of whimper, or maybe the wind. She turned off the tap and held her breath. Silence. "Must be the pipes," she muttered, though her voice didn't carry much conviction. The next morning, Eli was back at the garage wall, whispering something unintelligible, cradling his favorite stuffed dog in his arms. "He don't like the dark," he said solemnly. Rachel squatted beside him. "Sweetheart, are you pretending there's a dog in there?" He didn't answer. He only pressed his ear closer and nodded. "He cried lots." She reached out to touch the wall herself. It was cool and rough under her palm. Just an old wall. Just a toddler's imagination. Until later that day when something strange happened. The old dog bowl Rachel had found in the garage, a rusted, dented thing she'd meant to throw out, had disappeared from the back step. She had left it there after scrubbing it clean, thinking maybe she'd get a dog someday when life wasn't so overwhelming. But now it was gone. In its place were small wet spots in the dirt, like someone, or something, had been licking the ground. She looked around. Nothing. Just silence and the faint scent of something musty. Like damp earth and something else, something harder to place, like fear. She shivered. That evening, Rachel was rocking Eli to sleep when he turned and whispered, "He hungry, Mommy." "He cold." Her chest tightened. "Who, honey?" "The doggy. In the wall." That night, she stood outside with a flashlight, waving it across the garage wall like a detective. She even knocked on it a few times. Solid. Dead quiet. But as she turned to go, the beam of her flashlight flicked past something, just for a second. A small, fresh gouge in the wall, no larger than a coin. It hadn't been there before. She leaned closer. Inside, behind the layers of old cement, it was dark. But she thought she saw something glint. A bead of sweat ran down her temple. The next day, she called her neighbor, Mr. Hardwick, a retired carpenter who lived 2 houses down. He was skeptical but agreed to look. "Probably just rats," he said as he peered at the wall. "Or an echo bouncing off old pipes. You know how these old places are." But Eli wouldn't let it go. "He's stuck," he said, pointing to the wall with quiet certainty. He want to come out. By the 5th day, Rachel could no longer dismiss it. She'd begun to hear it too, at night, after Eli had fallen asleep. A low whimper. Not constant. Not loud. But unmistakable. A sound of pain. Of loneliness. She couldn't sleep. And finally, on the 6th day, she made a call. Not to animal control. Not to the police. She called the one person in town known for doing the things nobody else would, Tom Alvarez, retired firefighter, local legend, and owner of the town's only pit bull rescue. He showed up in a flannel shirt, thick gloves, and a flashlight that looked military-grade. Rachel didn't even have to explain. She pointed at the wall. Eli stood beside it, pressing his small hand to the same spot, eyes solemn. Tom walked up and placed his ear against the surface. A moment of silence. Then, a muffled yelp. Faint. Desperate. Tom stepped back, face pale. There's something alive in there. Rachel's breath hitched. But how? Tom's eyes scanned the structure. We need to open it up. Carefully. And soon. Eli looked up, as if sensing the weight in the air, and whispered. He's waiting. Tom Alvarez stood in front of the garage wall like a man preparing for surgery. He ran a thick hand along the surface, tracing invisible seams, pressing against weak spots. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows over the cracked concrete, and Rachel felt the tension in her chest coil tighter with every passing minute. Eli sat on the back step with his stuffed dog clutched tightly to his chest, eyes never leaving the wall. He wasn't playing. He wasn't humming or fidgeting the way toddlers usually do. He just sat still, like he knew something sacred was about to happen. Tom turned to Rachel. You sure you haven't heard any barking? Just the whimpering? She nodded. Only at night. It's quiet, like it doesn't have the strength to bark. He sighed. It's been in there a while then. Whatever it is. Could be a stray that got stuck in a crawlspace somehow. Though, he knocked on the wall gently with a wrench. I've never seen a setup like this. Rachel folded her arms tightly, fighting off the sick feeling growing in her stomach. This house used to belong to my grandmother. She had a handyman who worked on the property before she died. She mentioned him once, said he was strange, secretive. Thought she meant he was just rude. Tom crouched, flashlight in hand, and peered into the tiny gouge they'd found the night before. The light bounced around the interior for a moment, then hit something. A flash of reflection. Eyes, he said quietly. There's something in there. Alive. Rachel's breath caught. It's real. Tom stood up slowly. Very real. Probably a dog, medium to large. Looks like it dug out a little space for itself behind the wall. God knows how it got there. He walked to his truck and came back with tools. A small crowbar, a flashlight, a portable fan, and a bottle of water. He wasn't just treating this like a job, he was treating it like a rescue. We're not gonna bust the whole wall down yet, he said, setting the tools down on a tarp. We'll start with a small hole and see if we can get a better look. If it's badly hurt, we'll need the vet. If it's aggressive, we'll need to sedate it. Either way, we need to stay calm. Rachel nodded, swallowing hard. Eli watched them both, wide-eyed and utterly silent. Tom began to work, gently at first, prying loose a thin layer of plaster and then chipping away with careful, deliberate movements. Every tap echoed with tension. Minutes passed. Dust billowed up. Rachel took a few steps back, holding Eli in her arms. He clutched her shirt with one hand and held his stuffed dog against his cheek with the other. Suddenly, a low, guttural noise drifted from inside the wall. Not a bark. Not a growl. A whimper. Tom froze. Rachel's heart stopped. Eli whispered, "He's scared." Tom leaned in, eyes narrowed. "Hang on, buddy," he murmured. "We're coming." Another small panel of the wall gave way, revealing a jagged, dark cavity. The smell hit them first, rank and sour, a mix of urine, mold, and the unmistakable scent of fear. Rachel turned her face away, gagging. Tom shone the flashlight inside. There, crouched and trembling in the back corner of a hollowed-out concrete compartment, was a German shepherd. Dirty, thin as bone, his fur matted and patchy. One eye was swollen shut. His front paw was bent at a strange angle. But even through the filth, the dog's gaze was piercing, locked on Tom with a mixture of dread and desperate hope. Rachel pressed a hand over her mouth. Oh my God! The shepherd didn't growl. He didn't bark. He just lay there, barely lifting his head. He's been here a long time, Tom said, voice breaking. Long enough to lose his voice. Long enough to give up. Rachel's eyes welled with tears. How does this even happen? Who would? Tom sat back on his heels. Only two ways a dog ends up sealed behind a wall like this: accident or cruelty. And accidents don't pour fresh cement. Rachel shuddered. You think someone did this on purpose? Tom nodded slowly. Looks that way. There's no way in or out from this side. It's a sealed cavity. If this garage was renovated at some point, and someone didn't want to deal with a dog. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. Rachel felt Eli shift in her arms. He reached out toward the hole, small fingers wiggling. Doggy! The shepherd's ear twitched. Rachel tried to pull him back, but Tom held out a hand. Wait, look. The dog, slowly, painfully, began to crawl forward. Each inch looked like agony, but he didn't stop. He kept his eyes locked on Eli's tiny hand, inching closer until his nose touched the edge of the opening. And then, with all the gentleness of a prayer, Eli placed his hand on the shepherd's muzzle. The dog didn't flinch. He didn't move. He just closed his remaining eye and exhaled. Rachel wept. She couldn't help it. The sight of her child, a baby really, reaching into the darkness to touch something broken and forgotten, it undid her completely. Tom wiped his face with his sleeve. Okay, he said, voice hoarse. This dog wants to live. Let's get him out. Over the next hour, Tom expanded the opening just enough to assess the dog's injuries. The paw was fractured, and the dog was dehydrated to the point of collapse. But he was stable. Barely. Rachel called the town's veterinary clinic. By the time the van arrived, the sun had nearly set. The vet tech gasped when she saw the condition of the dog. Who did this? She asked, eyes blazing. We don't know, Rachel replied. But we're going to find out. As the shepherd was lifted onto the stretcher, Eli walked over and placed his stuffed dog beside him. For you, he said. The vet tech blinked rapidly and nodded. We'll make sure he keeps it. The van pulled away. Tom stayed behind, sitting on the porch with Rachel and Eli as dusk rolled in. The cicadas had gone quiet. Do you think he'll make it? Rachel asked. Tom looked at Eli. He made it this far. Thanks to him. Rachel wrapped her arms around her son, trembling. I didn't listen at first. I thought he was just being silly. Tom's voice was soft. Sometimes the youngest ones hear the things we've forgotten how to listen for. From inside the garage wall, the last echo of a whimper faded into silence. But something deeper had awakened in all of them. The next morning, the garage looked like a construction site. Yellow caution tape flapped in the breeze. The hole in the wall had been taped over with clear plastic while dust and rubble lay in small piles on the grass. The air smelled like wet concrete, motor oil, and something else, the faint trace of sorrow. But the house felt different, lighter. Rachel noticed it the moment she stepped outside with Eli still in his pajamas, gripping his sippy cup and blinking at the sun. She felt it in the quiet, like the house had been holding its breath for years, and now it could finally exhale. Tom arrived early, coffee in hand, eyes bleary but determined. The vet kept him overnight. For fluids, x-rays, pain meds, he said, lowering his voice so Eli wouldn't hear the worst. One of his ribs is broken. That paw? Fractured in 2 places. But he's stable. They said it's a miracle he's even alive. Rachel stared at the wall. We still don't know how long he was in there. No, Tom said. But we're going to find out. They both turned at the sound of a car engine approaching. A dusty pickup pulled into the driveway, and out stepped a woman in a vest marked Animal Welfare Investigation Unit. Her name was Maria Trent, and she carried a clipboard and a hardened look that said she'd seen too much cruelty to be surprised by anything. I got the vet's report, she said. This is officially a cruelty case now. If someone sealed that animal behind a wall and left it there to die, She stopped herself, jaw clenched. We'll find out who. You said the property was renovated a few years ago? Rachel nodded. My grandmother had a contractor. I don't know his name, but I can check her files. Maria jotted something down. Do that. We'll need any permits, payment records, anything you can find. Eli tugged at Rachel's leg. Mommy. She bent down. What is it, baby? He pointed toward the garage. We need to clean the sad off. Rachel blinked. The sad. He nodded seriously. It's still there. Doggy left, but sad still stuck. Tom's eyebrows lifted. He's not wrong. And so, for the rest of the day, they worked. Tom brought in heavier tools, and with Maria's permission, they widened the opening in the wall. What they uncovered behind it was more than just a makeshift prison. It was a chamber. Crude, like someone had boxed in part of the original garage and sealed it shut. No food. No water. No ventilation. And no mistake, this was intentional. Rachel found old receipts buried in a drawer inside, payments made in cash to a G, hardly contracting, a business that, as Maria discovered, had since been dissolved. But Tom recognized the name. I knew a Jerry Hardley. Real piece of work. Did jobs under the table. Known for cutting corners, especially when it came to animals. He shook his head. If he found a stray or an abandoned dog in a building project, he didn't take it to the shelter. He got rid of it. Rachel felt sick. You think this was one of those dogs? Tom nodded grimly. I think it's the one he didn't quite kill. That night, local news trucks rolled into Wesley Grove. Word had spread fast. A toddler heard something no one else could. A dying dog sealed in a wall. A rescue that should have never been necessary. The story had already gone viral on Facebook. People lit candles. Some showed up with flowers, treats, and cards addressed simply to the brave boy who heard the dog. Rachel was overwhelmed. She didn't want fame. She wanted answers. And healing. But Eli didn't seem fazed by the attention. He stood in his dinosaur pajamas in the front yard, holding the stuffed dog he'd given to the real one. Someone from the news crew asked if he'd like to say anything. Eli looked at the camera, tilted his head, and whispered. He was crying, so I listened. That soundbite spread faster than wildfire. The next day, the vet called. He's awake, the nurse said with a smile in her voice. And he's asking for your boy. At the clinic, the German Shepherd, now nicknamed Shadow by the staff, was sitting up for the first time. His eyes were tired but alert, his body wrapped in bandages. When Eli walked in, dragging his little feet across the tile, Shadow perked up. His ears twitched. His tail thumped, slow and weak, but unmistakable. Eli toddled forward and placed his hand gently on Shadow's nose. I found you. Shadow licked his fingers once, then rested his head in Eli's lap. The room was silent, save for a few sniffles from the vet techs. Rachel stood in the doorway, heart breaking open. And Tom, grizzled and tired, wiped his eyes and looked away. Maria stepped in quietly. You know, she said, we've rescued animals from basements, yards, even dumpsters. But never from a wall. Rachel nodded. He wasn't just stuck in the wall. He was buried. Maria's expression darkened. Not anymore. Before they left, the vet handed Rachel the stuffed dog Eli had brought the night before. But Eli shook his head and placed it beside Shadow again. It's his now, he said. Rachel knelt beside him. You sure, baby? He looked at her with the kind of gaze that didn't belong on a toddler's face, something ancient and full of knowing. He's not alone anymore. And in that moment, Rachel understood something she hadn't before. Eli hadn't just heard a dog crying. He'd heard a soul breaking. And he'd answered. The days that followed the rescue were a whirlwind, but somehow, every moment felt sacred. The town of Wesley Grove, once sleepy and overlooked, was now at the center of a story that had spread far beyond its boundaries. Newspapers, online articles, and even national news channels were reporting it. Toddler saves dog trapped in wall for years. Little boy's big heart rescues forgotten soul. The boy who heard what no one else could. Rachel's phone rang constantly. Strangers sent emails and letters. Offers poured in, donations, dog food, handmade toys, even a college scholarship fund started by a local vet school in Eli's name. But through all the attention and media, Rachel remained focused on two things: her son, and the dog who wouldn't stop looking at him like he'd been pulled from the grave by an angel in diapers. Shadow was still in recovery. His ribs ached. His paw was healing slowly. But the swelling in his eye had gone down, and he could finally stand for short periods. The clinic let Eli visit every afternoon, and every time the toddler walked in, Shadow wagged his tail with slightly more strength than the day before. Rachel watched it all unfold with awe. The vet, Dr. Lin, pulled her aside one afternoon. "It's the strangest thing," she said softly. "When we first brought him in, he wouldn't let anyone near him. He growled, snapped, trembled. But your boy? He walked in, and the dog just melted." Rachel nodded. "Eli's always been like that. He notices things. People, animals, emotions. Things even I don't pick up." Dr. Lin smiled. "Whatever it is, it's working. That dog is healing faster than we ever expected." But not everyone in town was content to focus on the healing. Maria Trent, the animal welfare investigator, was working quietly but fiercely behind the scenes. She tracked down Jerry Hardley, the shady contractor who'd sealed the garage wall, and the dog behind it. He was living 2 counties over, doing under-the-table work again. When confronted, he claimed not to remember the dog. "Was probably a stray," he shrugged. "Didn't even bark. Figured it was dead." Maria's face turned to steel. "It wasn't dead. And now neither is your career." Charges were filed. The news coverage exploded again. Back at the house, Rachel and Tom continued repairing the garage wall, this time with purpose. They didn't patch it up to forget what had happened. They preserved part of the damage. A jagged, roughly 3-foot wide opening was left untouched, framed in wood with a small brass plaque beneath it. "Here cried a soul unheard," until one small voice chose to listen. People came just to see it. Eli would sometimes walk over and sit near it, talking softly to the empty space as if it still held memories, or ghosts, or maybe just the echo of hope. Shadow, now out of the clinic and living in the house, would curl up beside him, resting his head on Eli's leg. His fur had started to fill out again. His appetite was back. He moved with a limp, but even that seemed to grow easier every day. Rachel found herself smiling again, genuinely. The fear she'd carried since the move, fear of failing as a mother, of starting over, of being alone, had faded into something warmer. She had purpose now. Something bigger than herself. She began volunteering at the local animal shelter. She took photos, wrote bios for rescues, and helped build out a donation page that was quickly flooded by visitors moved by Shadow's story. One night, she sat with Tom on her porch, watching the sunset as Eli and Shadow played in the grass. "You ever think about how different this could have gone?" she asked. "If I hadn't listened to him? If we just wrote it off as toddler imagination?" Tom nodded slowly. "Most people would have. Most do." Rachel swallowed. What if he hadn't made it? What if we found him too late?" Tom didn't answer right away. He just sipped his coffee and looked out toward the garage. "But we didn't," he finally said. "That boy pulled a miracle out of a damn wall. And now you've got a dog, a purpose, and a story that changed an entire town." She smiled, eyes glistening. "It did change things, didn't it?" Tom chuckled. "I've lived in Wesley Grove for 57 years. I've never seen people care this much about anything." And it was true. A local artist had painted a mural downtown, Eli's tiny hand reaching out to touch the nose of a shadowed dog behind cracked concrete. Beneath it, the words, "Compassion doesn't speak loudly, but it's always heard." Tourists began to visit. Donations to the shelter doubled. Volunteers tripled. And best of all, adoptions skyrocketed. People stopped seeing animals as burdens. They saw them as souls, beings capable of pain, fear, and hope. All because one little boy listened. That night, Rachel tucked Eli into bed. Shadow was curled at the foot of it, one paw slung protectively over the stuffed dog Eli had once given away and now had back, though he always let Shadow borrow it when he wanted. "Mommy," Eli whispered, blinking up at her. "Yes, baby?" Shadow dreams now. Rachel leaned down and kissed his forehead. How do you know? Eli yawned. He wag when he sleep. That means happy. She smiled. You made him happy, sweetheart. You saved him. Eli turned on his side, mumbling something as he drifted off. Rachel didn't catch the words. But Shadow did. His ear twitched. His tail thumped gently. And for the first time since Rachel moved into the house, everything was quiet, not from loneliness, but from peace. Spring bloomed in Wesley Grove like the town was waking from a long, collective sleep. Flowers lined the fences and porches. Birds returned to the trees. And in the yard just beyond the ivy-covered garage, laughter echoed, pure and unfiltered, from a little boy chasing a dog who had once been nothing but bones and fear. Shadow was running again. Not at full speed, his limp remained, but with joy. His fur had grown thick and healthy, a rich golden brown streaked with black. His ribs no longer pressed sharply against his skin. His ears stood tall again. His tail wagged like a metronome of life. And Eli, the boy who had heard what no one else could, ran after him with a superhero cape tied around his shoulders and grass stains on his knees. Rachel stood on the porch, arms crossed over her chest, a smile tugging at her lips. She held a mug of tea and watched the two of them play like nothing else in the world mattered, because, in truth, nothing did. You look happy, Tom said, stepping beside her. Rachel glanced over. I am. He sipped his coffee, then gestured toward the garage. Been thinking about painting over the whole thing. New coat, new beginning. What do you think? She shook her head. Leave it. It's not just our story anymore. It belongs to the town now. And it did. The town had changed, not in the way cities grow with new buildings or businesses, but in something softer, something quieter. There was more eye contact in the streets. More people stopping to say hello. More kindness in places people hadn't even realized they'd grown numb. The shelter Rachel volunteered at had adopted out every single one of their dogs in the weeks after Shadow's rescue. Even the senior dogs. Even the ones labeled unfriendly or hard to place. One man said, if a toddler could listen, so can I. A group of local kids painted paw prints along the sidewalk leading to the mural downtown. Beneath each paw print was a name, Daisy, Rusty, Milo, Chance, and then, finally, Shadow. At the center of the mural, Eli's tiny hand still reached toward the cracked wall. Tourists came now. A woman drove 3 states over just to place flowers in front of the garage. Someone sent Eli a hand-carved wooden doghouse with a plaque that read, To the listener. The mayor officially declared the first Saturday in May Compassion Day. There were food trucks, pet adoption tents, and a storytelling circle where people shared stories of how animals had saved them. Rachel told her story too. But her favorite part was always the same. It wasn't me who saved him. It was my son. All I did was stop long enough to believe him. One afternoon, while cleaning out an old desk in the garage, Rachel found a box of her grandmother's things. Inside was a faded photograph, her grandmother, smiling beside a large German shepherd. On the back, written in looping cursive, Shadow, 1989. My protector. Rachel sat down, stunned. Shut up. The same name the vet staff had given him after the rescue, just a placeholder, they'd said, something to call him. But maybe it wasn't random at all. Maybe the name had survived, buried in the air, in the dust, in the echoes. Had it been her grandmother's dog? Had someone tried to get rid of him during the renovations? She never found the answers, but she didn't need to. Some things come full circle without needing explanation. That night, Eli climbed into bed and patted the blanket beside him. Shadow! The shepherd padded in and leapt up with surprising grace. He turned in a circle before flopping down beside Eli, resting his head across the boy's legs like he'd always belonged there. Rachel stood in the doorway, smiling as she watched them drift into sleep. Later, in the silence of her own room, she wrote a letter. Not to anyone in particular, just to the moment that changed everything. Dear whoever needs to hear this. A few months ago, I thought I had moved into an old house full of dust and regret. Turns out, I moved into a home full of stories, waiting to be heard. I thought I knew what being a mother meant, protect, teach, lead. But my son showed me that sometimes, our only job is to listen. A wall was broken. A life was saved. And somehow all of us were healed. A week later, the letter was shared on a local blog. Then the national one. Then it was read aloud on a morning talk show. People everywhere began to write their own letters to whoever needs to hear this. They weren't just about dogs. They were about grandmothers, regrets, forgiveness, second chances. It sparked something, an undercurrent of gentleness in a world often too loud to notice a whisper. And it all started with a boy. A whisper. A wall. And a dog who still limped, but no longer ran from shadows. Because now he was home.